So thank you for joining us on Let the Healing Begin podcast. I am your host, Asia, and today we have Laura Renner. I'm sorry. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So whereabouts are you from?
So I currently live in Denver, Colorado. I grew up in Rockville, Maryland, which is a suburb of DC. And I've been in Denver for just over 12 years now.
Okay, you like it?
Love it. I grew up as a beach girl and always around water, but the mountains definitely have a calmness to it, and being in nature definitely makes a difference. So it's been great.
That's good. So let's take it back to your childhood. What was it like growing up for you?
You know, it's funny because in the moment, I thought my childhood was great. And in a lot of respects, it still was. I definitely had a lot of privilege. I had a stable home, two older sisters. My parents were together and are still together to this day. But now that I can look back on it and reflect a little differently, I can see how much there was a lack of safety present for me based on a lot of trauma that happened. And I lived in a pretty persistent state of anxiety. And I just thought that that was normal. I knew that I was a nervous kid, but I never really recognized the severity of it. And so reflecting back on it now, I actually lived a very scared and feeling unsafe childhood, which is unfortunate, but thankfully there are still a lot of good memories that I can buffer that with to make that a little better.
Yeah. So what's like the earliest age that you remember this nervousness, and what was the cause of it?
So I don't exactly know. The earliest memory that I have was in preschool. I was about 4, and someone brought in for show and tell. They brought in a Great Dane, so a pretty large dog, especially for a 4-year-old. And I just was set into panic, and I started crying. I had to be removed from the classroom. And prior to that, this hadn't happened. But after that, unfortunately, I was bit by about 5 dogs between the ages of 5 and 8, I believe. So I was just always nervous. I know that I broke my leg when I was 3. I fell out of a tree. So I'm sure that that definitely created a lot of just fear. But I was always a scared kid. And even with all of the EMDR and hypnotherapy and various therapies that I've done to try and get to more root causes and sources of a lot of the way I am, I still haven't really been able to identify specifically where that fear came from, but it's been with me for pretty much the entirety of my life.
hmm Have you ever expressed this to like your family, your sisters, your parents?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So, I mean, we openly talked about it when I was young, how I was nervous and anxious. I started seeing a therapist in late middle school, early high school. My mom actually got me involved with a hypnotherapist for my anxiety when I was in middle school. And it was definitely a problem, but it was something that I still just thankfully was able to push through. So I still was able to be high achieving in school. I still did a lot of sports. I still was involved in a lot of things that I was forced to put myself out there and be uncomfortable. So I kind of just treated that as a learned skill where I would get panicky, I would hyperventilate, my heart would race, I would sweat, but then I would just do it and I could just work through it. And with time, that lessened to some degree, but it was just always there. And it just became my normal. And so I learned to live with it, and I learned to just kind of work around it in every way that I could, really until about the last year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah. Are any of your sisters like that?
Not to the level that I was. I've talked about it pretty extensively with my sisters and my parents, but both my sisters can relate to having some anxiety, but all kind of internalized for the most part through their childhoods. But it's something that they definitely have both been vocal about as adults as well. And yeah, I think where I grew up, it was very normalized to be incredibly high achieving, and you had to be the best and you had to be perfect. And that was partially ingrained in my family, but that was also just kind of society for the area where I was between school and sports. And so there was just this constant pressure to do better. And that I internalized that as I was never good enough. So I was constantly feeling like I needed to be better, and mistakes were not okay. And I had to push myself harder and just really much do everything that I could to be better and be perfect. And I know that my sisters can resonate with that as well.
So when you say you were always pushed to do better, you mean by your parents? Is that like the way that you guys' household was?
It was by my parents, but also just in school. I mean, there was a lot of, even at an elementary school age, which is really terrifying to think back in hindsight, there was a lot of pressure to be the best. There were a lot of, they would draw the lines in the sand. If you don't achieve these levels, you're put into this group. And if you don't achieve these levels, you're put into this group. And if you're not able to keep up, you get pulled out. And so it was a constant state that I felt like I was never doing well enough. And that even though I did very well in school, it just seemed like it never was enough. And unfortunately, it was ingrained even as early as middle school, in the school system that I was in, that every move that you make impacts the rest of your life. Where you go to college, if you play sports, really whatever career path you want, you have to start developing those skills and set yourself apart at an early age. And I really took that to heart, and it had a lot of really detrimental effects for me.
So you feel like that was more damaging than like motivating for you?
Yeah, definitely, because it just the amount of pressure that it added. I'm someone who, it's really hit or miss with how I act under pressure. In some instances, I can be really great. That's how I was with work for a lot of my career. But especially as a child who had really minimal skill and ability to identify and express emotion, and I always just felt like I had to be afraid. I had to be afraid of everything. I had to be afraid of making a mistake because that could, cascade into more bad things and impact my future. And so I just developed from school, from sports, and a bit from my family as well, a lot of these irrational fears that every decision that I make can impact the rest of my life. And I took that on really strong, unfortunately.
Yeah. Does any of your other sisters feel I mean, does any of your sisters feel that way as well?
Yeah, so we all have been high achieving in very different directions, professionally and in life. And so I'm very close with one of my sisters, and we talk pretty often about just the pressure to achieve and how we both have struggled in our adult lives, especially with the idea of rest. And now I can really see that there's so much importance with rest in so many respects. But for the longest time, I just thought it meant you were lazy. And at least for me personally, not that wasn't something I necessarily projected onto others, but for me, I couldn't rest. I had to keep going. I had to make every second of every day productive. And that started with playing competitive sports at an early age in elementary school that took up anywhere from 4 to 7 days a week, every week, all the way through high school. And my sisters did other activities as well, but we all were very focused on school and had these very intense after school and outside of school activities and projects that kind of we treated as jobs in a lot of ways. And so it taught us at a really young age that we had to really spread ourselves thin and work really hard and keep going without rest.
Yeah. And rest is very valuable. Like it's man, it's priceless.
Yeah.
Um Now I'm gonna go back to where you said that you didn't feel safe with your parents. Why was that?
So full disclosure, I have great parents. I have a good relationship with them, and we've talked about a lot of these things. But I I know that when I was a kid, when I was a young kid, I had a lot of separation anxiety from my parents, especially from my mom. I got lost on a preschool field trip, and it set me into a full-blown tailspin. I also at age 7, I fell in a river and almost drowned. And my parents did the best that they could in the situation, was to make sure I'm okay, get us all home. We were about, I don't know, maybe like an hour from where we lived, and get us all home and make sure that we're safe. But my parents had no idea about the importance of, I needed to process that. I needed to be reassured, to be told that I'm safe, to be comforted, and not just kind of dried off and put in the car and go home. And there were a lot of instances like that. And even with, all these dog bites and various things that I've had, but just little moments that built and built and built on themselves, where I didn't feel like I could be comforted by other people. I didn't feel like I could be comforted by my parents, and I didn't feel like I could comfort myself. And that turned into a lot of frustration and emotional dysregulation and just all that fear. And so I think in my case, there were some significant experiences. I did have sexual abuse at the age of 5 also happened to my body. And all of those that built on each other just created this just lack of safety that then turned into more lack of safety, that turned into more and more dysregulation and more frustration. And it all just kept me in this chronic state of fear that I couldn't recognize and I was too young to deal with.
Yeah. I'm sorry that you had to go through that.
Thank you.
Um, Now with the sexual trauma, how did your family handle that? Did they, because some people's families like, and it's so sad, like some people, when that happens to them, they have parents and family that either like don't believe them, or sometimes they can be swept under the rug, or like, a lot of families don't want to talk about that type of thing. How was it for you?
So that's a great question. And actually, that was a repressed memory for me. So when last summer I pursued hypnotherapy because I had done various types of therapies, and I still felt this deep sense of fear that I couldn't identify. I couldn't identify a memory or anything in particular. I just had this feeling that there was something that happened. And during hypnotherapy, um, that memory came up for me and it was absolutely terrifying. I mean, the feeling of it was such a recognizable feeling, and just reliving all that and knowing just deep to my core that this was a part of my story was absolutely terrifying, and it messed me up for a while. And so I actually didn't tell my family for probably about 8 months after that. I was just afraid. And unfortunately, one of the things that I worked through that a lot of people work with or work through is the stigma of shame. And there's nothing to be ashamed of, but it was just this overpowering feeling of shame. And even though it was something my parents couldn't have prevented, and they had no idea, but I still just was scared for their reactions. I knew that they were going to be so deeply hurt and so sad. And I didn't want it to still feel like it, I didn't want them to feel like it was still their fault when it clearly wasn't. And it took a lot. It took a lot of building up to get to that place to be able to tell them. And when I did, I recognized one thing that I've learned about myself, especially with my anxiety, is that if I have a really challenging and stressful conversation, I can still just shut down. I lose my ability to, process my thoughts appropriately, to really come up with what to say. And so I recognized that this was something significant enough that it needed to be written down. So I wrote it down. I emailed my parents. I asked them to give me a couple days so they could process and so that we could have a conversation that's on much calmer terms. And they were incredibly supportive, and they were very sad, but they were also they treated me in the most comforting way that I needed and that I didn't even ask for, but they were able to provide, which was really great.
That's amazing. So, um, having to relive that moment, like how did you, well, let me back up some. If it's somebody that's listening, that may be, have dealt with something of similar or have went through the same exact thing, what would you say to that person?
Oh, it's it's really hard to find the words because in a lot of ways there just aren't words. It's just this I I really can I empathize with anyone who's been in that situation. I think the most important thing is to do whatever you can to take care of yourself, take care of your nervous system, to release that pain, that, stress, that fear, all of that, and find in whomever and whatever your support system. For me, I just was sent into this full blown acute stress response. It was not something that I was expecting. And I was a hot mess. I was a hot mess, and rightfully so. And I was just constantly crying. My emotions were all over the place. I would go from angry to deep sadness to shame to fear to just feeling like I needed to just like rip myself out of my own body. I was so uncomfortable. And thankfully, I had and still have an extremely supportive partner. I have a very close group of friends that are local to me and some that are far away as well that I confided in. And with time and with their support, I was able to feel a lot more safe within myself and more safe having conversations with other people about it, because so much of it is just also fear of how people will react, which is unfortunate that when bad things happen to us, we often just go straight to, well, I don't want to burden this person with this problem, or I don't want it to change our relationship, or I don't want them to think I only come to them with problems. And it's terrible that that can be the lens we often see things through. And so by opening up to these people and realizing that those fears weren't my reality, everyone was as supportive as humanly possible and has been throughout this entire time. And so I think just taking it slow and utilizing your resources, your support people, and just creating that ability to feel safe within yourself is super important.
Yeah. So after you finished high school, what did you move directly out of home or did you stay there? What did that look like for you?
I did. So I went to college about 6 hours away in upstate New York. And since I always played sports my whole life, I played field hockey for a couple years on my college team, and unfortunately had a very unsupportive, frankly, verbally abusive coach. So I ended up walking away from that experience. And college for me was good and bad, probably for a lot of people. I mean, it was definitely good to experience new things, put myself out there, but I was just constantly filled with anxiety. The fact that it was constantly meeting new people, new situations, having no comfort was incredibly challenging. I cried myself to sleep many nights. And also, that being said, since I didn't really know how to deal with my anxiety at that time, I turned to drugs and alcohol, mostly alcohol at the time, but I did whatever I could to kind of numb myself and just get through, because sitting with myself and sitting with my thoughts was torture. And so going to college was great. There were a lot of things I learned, and it forced me to still do new things and kind of put myself out there, but I still was in this constant state of very high stress, very high anxiety, still feeling like I need to be the best, obsessed with all of that. And so it definitely probably did a number on my body and my mind for sure.
Yeah. Man, I'm sorry that you went through all that. And you know what I was thinking when you said you had this coach that was verbally abusive, so you walked away. Like, I'm proud of you for walking away, because oftentimes, like, we'll just stay in that and think that we have to endure that, and we don't. Nobody deserves to be abused, because abuse is more than just like physical violence. It's mental, it's emotional, it's verbal, it's all of the above. If anybody taking advantage of you or not treating you the way that you deserve to be treated, that's abuse. So I definitely salute and commend you for walking away from that and not staying in that and letting someone tear you down, whether it was a coach, whoever it was. So
I
I'm
I
proud of you.
appreciate that. I was absolutely terrified to leave. Sports was always even though it was anxiety riddled for most of my life, it was also a comfort blanket in a lot of respects. And it was something I was good at. And so walking away from that group of friends and that community was terrifying. But I just finally got to my end point, and I'm so glad that I did. I have no regrets with that. But you're exactly right. It's walking away from situations like that are really terrifying, and you never know how you're gonna make it through, or what the other side's gonna look like, because it's that getting out of your comfort zone and the newness. But it's every time that I've had to do that, I have always looked back with no regrets and have been incredibly grateful for it.
Absolutely. Um, so let me ask you this. Has there ever been a space in your life where you felt like just safe and not a reason to be nervous or fearful or any of that?
So minimally, which I hate to say, but really the last year has been the safest I've ever felt, but also this has been the year of completely uprooting almost every part of my life. So it hasn't in a lot of respects, but I left my career in nursing last year when I realized how unhealthy I was in that environment, and that was after I had a traumatic brain injury. And so I wasn't able to go back. And thankfully, I'm so incredibly grateful actually for that brain injury, because I would have never stopped. When I was working as a nurse, I was completely overdoing it, not taking care of myself, putting everyone before me, and living an incredibly unhealthy lifestyle at work and outside of it. And after I left my job, I didn't have a plan. And I also, at the time, within about a month period, I left my job, I sold my home, and I moved in with my boyfriend. So all the things all at once. Talk about the most unsafe, ridiculous, high anxiety feeling, which that really tested me in a lot of ways and forced me to really create a lot of that inner safety, and also express the needs of support that I need from other people, from my boyfriend, from my family, from my friends, because that was something that I just never really did. I never utilized the people in my life to the way that I needed to, which oftentimes is just saying, I'm not okay. I don't know why I'm not okay, but I'm not okay. And I need to talk to you, or to be around you, or for you to just hear me say that. And so the last year has been a lot of, for me, working on a lot of nervous system regulation, doing a lot of trauma healing therapy modalities, getting comfortable in my body, and helping to retrain my nervous system to feel safe. And thankfully, I've had a lot of support in that process as well. So it's been definitely very helpful.
That's amazing. So when you say, no, let's go back to your brain injury. How in the world did that happen?
So in December 2021, I was at a Christmas market in downtown Denver. So it was just kind of like this Christmas festival. And I was playing with my friend's kid. We were just kind of spinning around. I lost my balance, fell backwards, and landed just smack on the back of my head. And I, as a nurse, although I was a neonatal intensive care unit nurse, so I was a baby nurse, but I still had, some adult skills in that regard. So I knew that I didn't lose consciousness. I knew where I was. I knew what happened. I felt fine. I almost did my own mini neurological assessment. And I thought, I was fine. Sure wasn't. So the next morning I went to bed that night, and I woke up and I had massive bruising underneath my eyes and nausea and vomiting, which are all signs of a brain injury. I still was in denial. I didn't even go to the hospital first. I went to urgent care, ended up being told I needed to go to the hospital. And when they did my brain scan, it showed that I had multiple massive bleeds that were on top of my brain, pushing it to the left and downward towards my brainstem. And it would have killed me the next day if I hadn't had surgery when I did.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot. And because I had been a nurse and was so used to emergency situations, and also because of a lot of my childhood trauma, I could completely disconnect and just get into the mode of, okay, we have to get this done, and not really process or think about it. And initially, the surgery went really well. Thank goodness. I spent a couple of days in the ICU and was able to go home. And I thought, okay, the worst is over. I didn't have a lot of deficits. I was still doing pretty decently okay from a cognitive perspective, but then I had a seizure. Then I developed a life-threatening reaction to a medication. And then I developed a new brain bleed because I was still overdoing it. And I was facing another brain surgery. And so that caused me to really have to completely scale everything back. I wasn't even allowed to do basic tasks around my home, and I lived alone. So it was just, I had to basically just sleep, eat, rest. That was it. And I lost the ability to do math. I lost a lot of my speaking, a lot of my processing, my word finding during this time, because I couldn't tolerate any stimulation. I had to just completely shut down to heal my brain and to prevent this bleed from getting worse. And so thankfully, the bleed was able to resolve. And so I didn't have to have another surgery. But it was the worst time of my life. It was by far the lowest time of my life, because I was forced to sit with my anxiety, sit with my fear, sit with my spiraling negative mindset. And I had panic attacks multiple times a day. I was deeply depressed. I was fearful that I'd never be able to work again, that I'd never be able to drive again, that all these things. And it messed me up. And thankfully, just one day, I had this realization where if I don't shift my mindset and I don't change how I'm feeling internally, I am going to die. And so that's when I, went as far as I could tolerate at the time down the rabbit hole of podcasts and audiobooks around positivity and healing and mindset and meditating and doing visualizations and doing whatever I could to rewire my brain and my body away from this negative, stressful, acute state towards much more relaxed and truly believing that I could heal.
That's amazing. You know what? That's amazing. God spared your life. Um, that's so crazy. And here you are. Like you didn't think you was gonna be able to drive, all this stuff, and here you are telling your story. Like that's amazing. So for listeners, because I know oftentimes like the hardest place to get out of is like our mind, right? Because that's just the way that it is. It's really hard. Like it's a battle up there sometimes. And so, can you tell everybody how deep of an impact that actually has on our lives? Like just our thought process and our perspective of things, like how that really does, affect our reality.
That's such a great question because it literally impacts everything. I mean, I'm a big nerd. I've gone down the rabbit hole of exploring all of the science behind it all, the neuroscience, the neuroplasticity, stress physiology, all of that stuff. And it impacts everything. And in my case, it did. I mean, even prior to the brain injury, I had 5 years of significant unexplained health problems that no one could figure out for someone who was seemingly healthy in their early 30s. And I truly believe, and I think there's a lot of evidence to show now that it was all because I was functioning in this high stress, heightened state, not taking care of myself, and just constantly living in fear and with anxiety and believing that everything's going to go wrong all the time. And it did, and that's exactly what happened. And so the first book that really got me on that path to healing my mindset was Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And he talks about a lot of the neuroscience behind the power of positivity and the power of belief, and how and not just belief in a positive way, but beliefs in a negative way. And for me, beliefs in a negative way manifested as, I think I'm a bad person. I don't think people want to be my friend. I think I'm bad at my job. I think things are never going to get better. I think only bad people want to date me. And that's really how a lot of my life was. And whether it was, I was attracting a lot of these experiences, or that was the only lens I could see my life through. So because I thought that way, that was all that I saw. And switching to this really intentional, and by intentional, I mean literally incredibly intentional shift towards daily, especially at the beginning, multiple times an hour, multiple times a day, saying affirmations to myself about feeling safe, about I am a good person, I am capable of healing, my body is healthy, my brain is healthy, I'm a good person, and just saying all these things that sound simple. And old Laura would have just brushed that off and been like, no, thank you, that I'm not interested. But it has made the most transformative and significant shift in my life.
Absolutely. Because what do they say? Speak things into existence. And it's
Mhm.
like you said, it's an intentional decision every single day. Like every single day when I wake up, I'm like, oh my God, thank you. I am alive another day. That means I got another chance to get this right. I got another chance to help somebody. I got another chance, just to enjoy and be grateful for the life that I do have. And so that's amazing. So I know you said you started like reading books. What other type of things did you take on to help you? Did you journal at all? Like, what else did you incorporate in your life?
Yeah, so I definitely journaled a lot. And initially, with my brain injury, I actually started doing that as more of a means of testing my short term memory, since I was having a lot of memory issues.
Mhm.
And then one day I just started writing because I felt so alone and so isolated and so misunderstood. And I just started writing out my feelings and just, basically just writing just anything that I could think of, like the stream of consciousness onto the page. And I would just fill page after page after page every day. And just having that release was so impactful. I also, for me, meditation has been huge because I completely disconnected from my body. I have uh that's been a part of my practice that I do every single day, even just for 5 minutes. And I oftentimes will just use a guided video on YouTube, even, and that's free. Just getting into your body, getting into your breath, and just actually relaxing because we're so constantly focused on what we have ahead. Have to do this task. This is next, and just constantly worrying and thinking about the future. And that's been a way to really get me just into the present and feeling in my body. And then I've done numerous types of trauma healing therapies. So I've done somatic experiencing therapy, EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, craniosacral therapy. I've done Hakomi method, and a lot of just connection to my body, breath work, meditation, like I said, really just getting out in nature, finding ways to just truly stay present and get out of my head and into feeling in my body has been just paramount for me.
Absolutely, living in the now.
Yep.
Now let me ask you this: do you still have like problems remembering things and stuff like that?
So I don't think so. I'm going to say I'm like 95% in a lot of respects. Back to, I say in quotations, back to my old self, because I'm very different from my old self in a lot of ways. However, my short term memory has mostly returned. I did a lot of, I mean, months of multiple times a week of speech therapy and occupational therapy to help with my memory, my speech, my cognitive processing, my balance, dizziness, all of the symptoms that came about after my brain surgery and traumatic brain injury. And so, and also through EMDR, it's interesting how that opens up a lot of memories and a lot of things that I had forgotten. So, in a lot of respects, I have a lot more memories that I had forgotten about through doing that therapy for a while. But my short-term memory seems pretty close to where it was. Thankfully, I've been able to do a lot of really hard work to really return to a lot of those old patterns and things. So that's been great.
I'm so happy for you.
Thank
Now,
you.
this next question, I've never asked anybody this. So, thinking about that young, s- scared, nervous girl that you were, right? And the version of yourself that you've become, right? If you could if you could speak to that inner child, what would you say?
So I love that you asked this question because I've actually done a lot of meditations involving speaking to my inner child because so internal family systems theory talks a lot about how you have different parts of yourself, and there's a part of me that's still the scared child, and that scared child takes over a lot, and a lot of was taking over a lot of my life. And so I've done a lot of meditating around speaking to myself at various ages as a kid and comforting myself. And for me, it's been a lot of just reassuring that I am safe. I am safe. I have you, you have support, you have supported me, and almost like kind of having more of a conversation, not just having it just be me, but just reassuring my, little 3-year old, 5-year old, 7-year old, even 10 to 12 to 13-year old self that I am safe. It's okay to make mistakes. You don't have to be perfect. You're doing such a good job. Believe in yourself. Like you're an amazing person and just keep going.
Absolutely, that's good. And you know what? I do CBT work, and one exercise that we do when we talk about the inner child, because you'd be surprised. Like, well, pretty much all of us have some sort of trauma. It may not have come from parents, but we all have some level of trauma from childhood. And so oftentimes we just grow right past that trauma and just continue life without going back to deal with that trauma. And so part of connecting with the inner child and is number one, connecting, making that connection and making those things right, and then reparenting that inner child, so that we can heal past that. Now let me ask you this: do you feel like when you do um handle and deal with your inner child, do you feel like that brings you a level of closure, or does it assist in your healing?
So initially, I didn't feel a lot of closure because it felt, it still wasn't comforting enough. I just needed so much reinforcement for that comfort to get through. And so after doing, that type of work for many months and, probably at least 20 plus inner child meditations alone, if not more, I think it's finally gotten through and I can feel it. And even now, when I can feel myself getting really anxious and heightened, and my nervous system calming techniques don't seem to be working as well, I will just kind of imagine or look at a picture of myself as a kid and just say, you are safe to be doing this, you are loved, you're doing a great job, believe in yourself.
Absolutely. Now let me ask you something else. When you look at pictures of yourself, are you ever taken back to that feeling again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm often just extreme anxiety and sadness. I mean, I especially was a kid who cried a ton. I didn't understand emotions. I didn't understand feelings. I didn't understand how to express them. Or even, especially when I was in these really stressed out states, I would just go straight to just shutting down. I would cry. I couldn't think. I couldn't use my words. And I know that that's frustrating for adults, whether it was my parents or others. And so I was often told not to cry. Crying doesn't help. Crying doesn't solve anything. And so I took that on as, a young kid as, okay, just shut up and don't feel anything. Do what you can to not feel anything and internalize it. And so I would just be dealing with all of this panic and frustration just inside. And, especially by like other kids who didn't get it, they would make fun of me and make me feel embarrassed and things like that, which of course, kids are kids, not intentional.
Yeah.
But there were all of these things just reinforced to me that expressing emotions were wrong. And so I went from being a super teary kid to learning you never cry. You just hold it all in. And so I held so much in. And so looking back, on these old pictures and just thinking about myself as a kid, it makes me feel really sad because I was carrying so much and didn't feel that there was anyone I could really go to help me with it. And I know that there are a lot of kids and adults that feel that way.
Mhm.
And it's so it's sad, and hopefully that, by talking about these things more, it enables kids and parents and to have just more of a support network and have more of this open dialogue, and for adults especially to feel empowered to look back and work through a lot of these things, because I mean, it's made just the most difference in my life than anything else has. And I know for a lot of people it's done the same.
Absolutely. And you know what? I've noticed that in my own healing journey as well. The number one thing has been forgiveness with me for me. That has helped me heal probably the absolute most. Forgiveness. And then two, like doubling back to deal with all that stuff that I, was traumatized from or hurt from. And like dealing with it now. That's the only way to really put a stop to it. It's so hard.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought up forgiveness work, because I always learned that you don't forgive people, you hold grudges and you hold that against them for the rest of their lives. And learning how much not forgiving people, it impacts you. It doesn't impact the other person. You hold it on. And there's a quote that says forgiveness is like poison, but or I forget exactly what it is, but essentially not forgiving someone is like poisoning yourself. And that's exactly right. And for me, I held on to, everyone who ever wronged me. I thought that I had to carry that. And in reality, I mean, they don't know. And I don't want, and in hindsight, I don't want them to feel that either. And a good example of that is my ex-husband. So we were together for 8 years. He was extremely emotionally abusive, took advantage of me in a lot of ways. We had a very gnarly divorce. And for the longest time, I just wanted him dead. I hated him and I wish the worst for him. And when I realized that holding on to that was impacting me more, and also that he is this way because of all of the trauma that happened to him. He had a very severely traumatic childhood. And so I can completely forgive him because I know that everything that he did to me was a result of trying to survive. That was all ways that he had learned how to survive and how to get by. And even though it was at my expense, that was just reality. And so I'm able to forgive him. And I've learned a lot, and hopefully he has as well. But learning how to even just forgive, a friend that, did me wrong that I was holding on to. And whether it's even having those conversations outright or writing it down or just mentally, releasing that and kind of those ties is huge and so lightening. And you don't realize just how much it weighs down on you when you're holding on to that.
It is. And you know what? It says it's like drinking poison, expecting somebody else to die.
Yes, that's the quote. Mhm.
And you know what? So like forgiveness, I always tell people it's like number one, forgiveness is not for the other person. It's really to free you from the bondage of carrying that whatever it is that you're carrying or whatever it is that you are holding against this person. But I always, when I explain forgiveness to people, I always tell them, think about packing somebody up and putting them in a suitcase and like lugging them around with you all day long. That is super heavy. And I just don't want to do that. While they're off living life, you're carrying the baggage of whatever the situation was. And not to say that it justifies whatever happened or the things that took place. And it's not to say that your feelings are invalid, but to free yourself from that, and then not to mention like carrying all that tension within yourself is unhealthy. We don't want to die a premature death because we're carrying stress and tension that we could just let go of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that I mean, you could not be more right. I completely agree.
I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful because you know what? It's the difference between being happy and having joy, right? And when you
Mhm.
have like embarked this on this healing journey, it's really nothing that can, stop. Now let me pause and say this. It's not that we don't have bad days or rough days on the healing journey because it is some really rough stuff, and it's not for the weak, right? You really gotta want to heal in order to do the work. But when you do start that, you start to have joy. You don't just stop at being happy. And that's something that is priceless. That's something that no one else can take from you. And then it becomes personal. Once you get a little taste of what a healthy life looks like, then you're like, oh no, I got to have this.
Mhm.
And so in spite of like all the things that have happened to you in your past, from the dog bites to the river, like to everything, like you're still going and you're seeking out your true happiness, and I'm so proud of you for that.
Thank you so much. It's it's so crazy to say that in a lot of respects. It's crazy, at least for a lot of people, to understand that I'm grateful for the brain injury. I'm grateful for my emotionally abusive marriage. I'm grateful for a lot of the things that happened to me as a kid because it's brought me to this place where I've been able to learn and actually experience joy and happiness and enjoy my life and love my life and appreciate the people and the things in my life and myself, which is something that I was more just going through the motions of life. I was just constantly going a million miles an hour, thinking about the next thing. The joy, frankly, for the most part, came out of thrill seeking. It came out of substances. It came out of complete removal from my life in a lot of ways, anything to distract.
Yep.
That's where I found my joy. And so learning how to actually, like you were saying earlier, wake up and just be grateful and be like, awesome, I get to take on this day and something amazing can happen, or I can make something amazing happen right now. And it's funny in a lot of ways because I mean, always as such a negative person. My friends used to call me Wednesday Adams as a joke because I just made everything very negative. And and it was true. It was true.
Yeah.
I truly was. And now, not like I'm, everything's rosy and everything's great all the time. Cause just like you said, also, I still have my bad days. I still have my days where I'm angry. I still have my days where I'm upset. That's just the human nature experience. But for the most part, I'm able to find meaningful joy and happiness and gratitude and just these great feelings and actually feel it and believe it. It's not just, made up. It's not just, oh, I'm just saying this to say it. It's like I can actually experience it and feel it. And just seeing how much that's impacted my health, my relationships, just my daily life. It's huge.
You know what? I just watched, I don't remember if it was on TikTok or if I heard, no, I was listening to a sermon. This was yesterday or the day before. And the pastor that was speaking, he was talking about, matter of fact, the title of the message was The Impact of Joy, right? And he was speaking about how they did like a science study on people who were depressed and people who had joy, right? And I guess in one study, two people came down with the same exact like illness, and one person was depressed and the other person was just naturally like joyful. Well, one person, the person with the joy recovered in like 24 to 48 hours. And the person that was depressed, it took weeks for them to recover, and that just goes to show you because your immune system and, like you said, nervous system are not equipped to fight. They're weakened when we're stressed out and when we're unhappy, you know?
Oh yeah, I've gone down so many deep rabbit holes of exploring all of the research behind happiness and healing and beliefs and how much that impacts you from the positive and the negative perspective because I needed those facts. I couldn't just, especially at the beginning, I couldn't just say, "Oh, cool. You say it into the world and you manifest it and that works." I didn't believe that. I needed the science. And there is so much science, dating all the way back to early 1900s in a lot of ways about how believing that you're going to heal from something like that, or just when you're outwardly positive, your joy is contagious and you
It
feel
is.
better and you help other people feel better. But when you come across one person, who cuts you off, and you can either decide, oh, like whatever, that person's having a bad day, or you can go down, the path of everything's terrible, then I spill my coffee and now I'm late for work. And then you just have this, just complete frame of mind from a negative perspective. And it's so crazy to see. And for me to even see within myself how much I've gone down both of those paths and how they've impacted me.
Yeah. And then you know what? Like you said, like if we actually dial into that having a bad day, like, oh, I'm late for work and I spilled my coffee. Like if you walk around letting that reflect, like let it take over your day, then the whole day is like a whole domino effect and it tends to go bad like that, but and I know it can be challenging because some days I'm like, you know what? I'm not about to let this stress me out. I'm just not. I literally have to say that out loud, or I'll just walk away from it. I'm not about to worry about this. I just can't.
Yeah, no,
um,
I can relate to that because I was that person who one thing would happen that was trivial and didn't really matter, and it would completely wreck my day, and I couldn't snap out of it. And it's funny because not that long ago, I was trying to find my passport and I couldn't find it. And it didn't matter. I didn't need it in that moment, but I just couldn't find it. And I started just getting amped up, being like, well, what if it's not here? And just, I could feel myself getting elevated. And I went, you know what? We're going to take a pause. I left the room. I went outside. Thankfully, where I live, I'm able to see the mountains from a distance. I just looked at the mountains and I was like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And it was. And just taking that time to completely divert and not, one of my therapists used to talk about getting in the boat with the bad thoughts, because I used to always get in the boat with the bad thoughts. Otherwise, you can just see them happening and just be like, I'm not entertaining that. No. And
absolutely.
take another direction. And that has been huge for me personally. And it's something that I think we all can benefit from, but it's another learned skill that you have to do repeatedly to enable it to actually be a change that you experience.
Absolutely. So what are you doing these days?
It's a good question. So I left my job about 13 months ago,
Hmm.
and I started writing a book. And during the healing time, I was doing at that time also all last summer, really through, I mean, and still actively currently, I was doing a lot of trauma healing therapies and just trying all these different kinds to heal. And I was listening to and reading a lot of books on trauma, and they can be incredibly dense and painful and frankly awful to get through sometimes because you get these really specific, brutal stories of these things that happen to these people. And it's so amazing to see them come out the other side after the various therapies and things that they've done. But it doesn't make it easy to read, and it can be really triggering, especially if it's something similar to what happened to you. And so I really wanted to write a book that people can relate to, that can be, I'm not going to call it lighthearted because there's definitely still parts, there's still, I talk about a lot of significant things that happened in my life, but much more digestible, where that you can feel empowered and see, okay, sure, these bad things happen, but also look how I've been able to turn these bad things into really great, powerful things in my life. And how also, I think it's really important to discuss how I'm not healed. I'm not fully healed. Let's be clear on that. I have done a ton of healing, but I'm not like, yep, everything's good forever now. I'm still working through a lot of stuff. I still have anxiety. I still have those fear responses in my body, not nearly as often, but they're still there. And so I'm still doing a lot to process through and regulate myself. And so I wrote a book about my experience of how my brain injury and previous health problems, but particularly the brain injury led me to healing my trauma, how that led me down the path of exploring my childhood and all of the things that I learned along the way, which a lot of it was big takeaways for me were that I actually need to rest, that I actually need to take care of myself, and how much shifting my mindset has and will continue to change everything in my life.
Absolutely. So when is your book dropping?
So it published in June.
Okay.
So it's called No, I'm Not Fine, Thank You, because I think that's also something that we all say all the time that we're fine. And I was definitely responsible for doing that. I would just say, I'm fine, because you don't want to burden people. And oftentimes you think you're fine when you're not. And so saying to people and having the courage to say, I'm actually not fine, and being comfortable with that and being comfortable to either talk about it or not, but just being able to acknowledge it, I think is very important. And yeah, I really just hope that sharing my story and having more conversations like these really just stops perpetuating that cycle that our parents had and their parents had of, you don't talk about your problems, you hold everything inside, and you're fine, because we're not. We all have something significant that has happened in our lives that requires help, requires processing, requires dealing with, and hopefully can create a learning experience that can help others as well.
Absolutely. And you know what? So like growing up, I went through a lot of like abuse and stuff, right? And so like growing up in our house, we didn't have the chance to express ourselves and talk about what we felt. Like there was no such thing, right? So like I took that personally, growing up, I'm like, if I have kids or when I have kids, I don't ever want my kids to feel like that. So now, like with my child, communication is big, and just not only with him, but like in my everyday life, like communication is a must. If you want to be friends with me, like you have to be able to communicate because now that I'm able to voice my feelings, this is major. This is make or break. Like you said, we have to stop those generational cycles and curses and things like that. So that it's not, continuing down different family lineages and stuff like that. Like it has to stop in order for things to change. And you know what? I'm gonna buy this book because that I like that title.
Thank you.
I'll wait till my son asks me, "Are you okay, mommy?" No, I'm not fine. Thank you.
Yeah. No, and I love what you just said as well, because I mean, it doesn't even just have to be, it can be communication in any form. I think that that's something that we all struggle with in a lot of ways. And a lot of it is generational and the way society has, trained us to be in a lot of respects. So it can be really uncomfortable having a lot of conversations and opening up and being vulnerable, but it's so much more uncomfortable to carry all that with you too. And so
Hmm.
teaching young kids how to develop that at an early age and express emotions, sure, you know, crying isn't fun, being angry isn't fun, but you also have to release it. Your body is feeling that for a reason. And the importance of releasing it is huge. And teaching younger and younger people to be able to do that can have just such a mass effect on everybody.
And I treat crying and sadness and stuff like that's just like we are happy, we feel joy, we feel all these different emotions. Those are different features of us. Like, we were blessed to have those features. So sadness and anger are, and crying, that's all different ways, like all different features that we have. It's just the matter of how we express those things. And so, with us learning how to do that and teaching others, I'm excited to see, the cycle stop, you
Mhm.
know.
Very much so. And, it's been interesting to, for me, I mean, at 35, learning just even how to identify what emotions are and identify them within myself, that has taken years. I've been working with one therapist for years on that. And
Mhm.
even still, I'll have times where I'll be upset and I'll say to my boyfriend, I'm upset and I don't know why. And I don't know what I need from you right now, but just I'm upset, because it's still just, it takes a lot of learning. It takes a lot of identifying and recognizing not just how you're feeling, or you don't even always need to know the why, but also what you need. That's been a really hard thing for me, is learning what I need, because even though I always needed stuff, I never felt that I got it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I need to be alone. Sometimes I need to talk things out. Sometimes I need a hug. Sometimes I need to just go punch a pillow or scream, or, there's so many different things, and every situation is different. So learning, just a lot for me has been trial and error to see what helps and what doesn't, but it's so important to express emotions.
Absolutely. And you know what? I'm gonna say this one last thing. So one thing that's helped me too, like when I'm like just full of emotion and I just really need to let something out. Sometimes I will get in my vehicle and go park somewhere where it's empty. I roll up my windows and scream at the top of my lungs.
Yeah, nice. I love that. But that's so great. And it's so great that you know that you have that like in your tool belt as
Yeah.
something to do. I do something similar. There's a park with a lake about a half mile from my house, and I will drive there and just sit in my car and
Yeah.
just cry, just get it out. And people will see me and I'll just be like, I don't even care anymore. I used to be fearful at first and it would make me uncomfortable, but now I was just like, I don't even care anymore. Just
Yeah.
watch it. This is me expressing myself, and I need to do it.
Absolutely. We all need a good cry sometimes.
Yeah, very much so.
Absolutely. So one last question. So if people want to work with you outside of this, how can we find you?
So I have a website. It is my first and last name. So laurarenner.me. And so on my website, I have a little more info about me. I have a link to my book. I also have a free beginner's guide, a resource guide to trauma healing, where I go through a lot of information about specific therapies and things like that, but also specific tools, especially free tools that I like, YouTube resources, Instagram accounts, things like that, just kind of as good starting places. Right now, I'm really just deep in the learning phase. I love teaching. I love science. I have a lot of directions that I want to go. So right now I'm doing a lot of learning. So I haven't really figured out my next plan, which used to scare me to death, but now I'm very comfortable with it and I can accept it and be happy with that. But also on my website, you can connect with me. You can direct message me on there, or on Instagram. My account is Laura_Ren, RENN. And I'm happy to talk about all this stuff. I love talking about it because it's really empowering and it's great. It can be so hard for people to find, an outlet that they feel comfortable with. And if I'm that person, even if you don't know me, I'm more than happy to be that, if that helps get someone started in the right direction or take one step forward towards healing themselves.
Absolutely. I appreciate you and getting up here sharing your story, being brave. Um, and in spite of everything that you've been through, you still got a purpose here. You still got a purpose. That's why you're still here. It's a call on you to do some major work in the lives of other people, because of those traumas and those hurts that you've endured. That's what's going to help other people. So I appreciate you being brave, like even regardless of how scared, and how nerve wracking it can be. I appreciate you getting up here on the platform and sharing the ups and the downs in order to help other people let their healing process begin.
Thank you so much. And I've definitely along this journey had a lot of moments of being like, am I crazy for sharing all of these deep, dark parts of myself? But I know that I'm not, because it's so important and it's so helpful and it's a starting place. And the fact that you have a platform like this to really help empower people and help people feel more comfortable taking those initial steps or taking those next steps to heal is just so great and untouchable and something that's so important. So thank you so much for doing what you do as well.
No problem. I'm honored, honestly. So thank you all for joining us here on Let the Healing Begin podcast. Please don't forget to head over to www.greatergrowthllc.com, support the t-shirt and hoodie store, and then also head over to Amazon and purchase a copy of Back in My Day by Asia Wilson. And thank you so much once again, and until next time.